Hello everyone and welcome to MMA Start to Finish. Today we will be talking about UFC 2 No Way Out, also held in Denver, Colorado, much like the first event, this time a year later in 1994. Matt, do you have any initial thoughts about what struck you changing from the first event to this event?
First thing that I saw was it got faster. The
pacing was much better.
Yeah. So it wasn't even 90 minutes with seeing that one preliminary fight.
Yeah, so the structure this time was slightly different. Instead of having an 8-man tournament, they actually had a 16-man tournament. Because the first time, it wasn't insane enough. They needed to have you fight 4 times in one night, right? That makes way more sense. So we actually didn't see the first round except for Hoist Gracie's fight. They didn't televise the preliminary fights for the most part.
Yeah, so everyone that we saw had already fought once, except for that one preliminary round.
Yeah, except for Hoist Gracie versus Minoku Ichihara, which we will talk about in a moment. But before we get into that, I just want to talk about the broadcast again for a minute. The broadcast was much improved. Still, of course, a little shaky, but going from... It's amazing how having anything to work from the one event to the second... It made a lot of difference having any kind of reference point to talk about the fights.
Yeah. Though they were still getting into the groove of things, they were showing those graphics for everyone's fighting style.
Yeah, they tried to make a point of introducing everybody's fighting styles, but it just came off as really clumsy because instead of being specific and saying jiu-jitsu or sambo, they got specific with striking. They said like Muay Thai, kickboxing, they were fine there. But if you weren't a striker, they just said grappling, which would lead to fights like Hoist Gracie versus Remco Pardo, where it said grappling versus grappling. So it was a little weird in that respect, but they made an effort, you could tell.
Yeah, they also had one that was just exotics, which they didn't know what to put as, I guess.
Yeah, man, that's just like a polite way of saying bullshit, like stuff that doesn't work. The one exotics fighter, let's get into the fights. We'll go through the first fight. Hoist Gracie versus Minoku Ichihara. Pretty quick fight.
This was the only preliminary round we saw.
Yeah, this was the singular preliminary fight, and Minoku Ichihara his background was karate, and he wore a gi. The gi did not help him against Hoist fucking Gracie, okay?
No.
He put him in an armbar, didn't he?
Yeah.
He finished him with an armbar. Yeah, they grappled for... How long did this fight last?
I think they said about 5 minutes.
This one did actually last a while. This was one of the longer fights on the card. 5 minutes long. And it's funny because on Wikipedia here it says he had him in a lapel choke, but if I remember correctly, it was an armbar.
It was. It was because all the announcers thought he got choked out.
This is one of those cases where something gets put in the official record incorrectly because the people observing it did not know what was happening. And then it gets preserved that way even though it was clearly an armbar. But regardless, that fight was very quick. And one of the announcers actually this time had any jiu-jitsu experience, so he knew what he was talking about. I don't remember his name.
I don't either, but he had the weird hair.
He had like fluffy hair. He was talking about Hoist Gracie in this fight, and he said he stays on you like a crab. I remember him saying that. That was quite interesting. Not a bear, nothing intimidating. A crab.
Well, they don't let go, so it makes sense.
That's a good point.
From what I got from it was it pretty much went to a ground game where Ichihara didn't really have a ground game.
Yeah, he didn't know what he was doing.
Gracie. So they kind of just stayed that way until, for a while, Gracie just punched him. And they didn't really move, which makes sense for grappling.
Yeah, I mean, he knew he had complete control. He wasn't really gonna force anything because that's how you lose. You force something, and Hoist knew that, so he just waited for the arm bar to reveal itself, and then he took it. After this fight, as we talked about, they had those weird intros to the different styles of fighting. Some of them made sense. Some of them kind of just left you there shaking your head, but it was an attempt to improve upon the first event in presentation, which I respect.
Yeah.
The next fight, the first quarterfinal matchup, was Patrick Smith versus Scott Morris. Patrick Smith, who we last saw at UFC 1, losing to Ken Shamrock via heel hook. He was back this time. This fight was fast.
Yeah.
It was a little, well, how fast was it? It was 30 seconds long. Patrick Smith obtained full mount on Scott Morris and then elbowed his head into a fine paste.
He mounted him, got him with elbows, punched his mouthpiece out, then continued the elbows.
Yeah, it was one of those fights that I'm sure was shown when they were trying to convince the officials to change the rules to allow referees to actually stop fights. Because to this point, there were still no stopping fights. You just, the corner either threw in the towel or there was a tap out. You could not get, the ref couldn't stop you if you were unconscious.
And the refs weren't even that great with seeing when people were tapping out.
No, yeah, this was the first appearance of Big John McCarthy, who's like a legendary UFC referee. But even he was a little sloppy here. This is literally his first ever event. He didn't know what he was doing. Nobody knew what they were doing. And he let some submissions and some striking exchanges go on for quite a while.
Yeah.
Even once the towel was thrown in or once the tap occurred. But
there's a learning curve, but
yeah, I mean, you see exponential growth in officiating from here. It starts to piece itself together, especially when you see Big John winds up, I'm pretty sure, officiating almost every card for the next 6 years.
Yeah.
So he's around a lot. He's not the only official, of course, but he's like the godfather of officiating. The broadcast, I just wanted to mention again. I mentioned last time I corrected myself. I said there was no more Jim Brown. I lied. There's actually quite a bit more Jim Brown. Jim Brown showed up again here on this broadcast. I actually thought he did a pretty good job. He didn't do too bad. He didn't say anything stupid.
He didn't talk too much. He's kind of like me. He just has bits and pieces he throws in.
Yeah, he quietly observed, more or less. Yeah, so Patrick Smith basically just destroyed Scott Morris. The fight after that, the next quarterfinal matchup, was Johnny Rhodes versus Fred Adesh. And Johnny Rhodes, this was his only MMA appearance whatsoever. He has 3 fights all here on UFC 2. So it's a little bit of a spoiler. Johnny Rhodes did defeat Fred Adesh. Fred was a karate guy who did not have a preliminary fight. He was an alternate, and it showed. He got the shit beaten out of him. As a matter of fact, they have the method of finish here on Wikipedia as bulldog choke, which means he basically put him in a headlock around his neck and just cranked on it. And that was after beating the shit out of him, right? Like, he was bloodied up.
Fred Adesh.
You said he looked like a dad.
He looks like a dad. He looks like the dad who got involved with the karate place for your kid.
But doesn't actually know what he's doing?
Yeah.
No disrespect to Fred Adesh, but
he held out way longer than...
I mean, this fight went 3 minutes. Yeah, no, if this was a modern fight, this would have been wrapped up in the first, minute and a half. This went on for 3 whole minutes. That's crazy. Yeah.
Also, Johnny Rhodes, his fight before this was 12 minutes. That is the longest fight here.
Yeah, we didn't see that. Another thing we should mention. UFC 2, they actually did away with rounds. So, you just fought until the fight was over. There were no rounds.
There were basically no rounds in the first one.
There were basically no rounds, but they did... Well, there was unlimited rounds. They did have rounds. It was 5-minute rounds. After 5 minutes, you just fought another 5 minutes forever. But they didn't even have to... I think maybe one fight went over 1 round, or no? Not a single fight from UFC 1 made it to the 5-minute mark, so it didn't wind up having any effect. UFC 2, however, there was...
We're checking Wikipedia.
Yeah, we're looking right now. There was 4 fights that exceeded the 5-minute mark. All of them preliminary fights. The quarterfinal and semifinal matchups in the final, all under 4 minutes.
I think that's part of why this went so fast.
The pacing for this, like we said already, was excellent. Mm-hmm. It went by much faster, in a good way.
The shortest fight was the previous one, by the way, at 30 seconds.
Yeah, Patrick Smith. Here's how quickly that fight went. In my notes, I don't even have Scott Morris's name. I only know that because I'm looking at the computer right now. I didn't even get a chance to write his fucking name down. He got destroyed that fast. The next fight was Orlando Wet versus Remco Pardo. And I thought Orlando looked great. He was this shredded dude, this shredded Muay Thai guy.
I commented that he looked very wet.
He did look very wet. And I believe his name is pronounced Vet because he's French. But he did lose. Remco was a jiu-jitsu practitioner, but not a Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioner, an old-school Japanese-style judo school, like Sambo almost. He came from the Netherlands and trained out of the same camp as Gerard Gordeau. He was in his corner, actually, Gerard.
Yeah, we saw him make an appearance.
Yeah, so walk us through this finish, Matt.
Remco kind of got on top of Vet.
Yeah, Orlando had no grappling background whatsoever. So
Yeah.
once Remco fell on top of his chest, he didn't even really know to turn onto his side to hip escape. He kind of just let Remco lay on top of him.
And all Remco really did was just see what he could do
With his arm.
very slowly, and then realized, oh, I can elbow his head at this angle, and just did that until he knocked Wet out.
Yeah, once he realized that, he's like, oh, I can just throw elbows from here. And he threw some elbows behind him, and he knocked Orlando out, like, viciously, but also in a polite way, because after he was out, his corner didn't throw in the towel, and the ref had no power to stop the fight, so he kind of just looked at him while he was completely unconscious, and then the corner threw in the towel, and the fight ended. But it could have been a lot uglier, honestly.
Orlando tried to flop around a bit, but he didn't really have a chance at getting out.
Once he was on top of him, that was really it.
Yep.
There wasn't a lot there. The next fight was Jason Deluca versus Hoist Gracie.
Yep. It went very quickly to a grappling fight on the ground.
These guys both have a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background, so you kind of expected it to go there, but you can see there's levels to this shit, and Hoist was just well above Jason. And
Jason said his martial art was the...
Oh, Kung Fu, that's
yeah.
right. Let me rephrase this. His original martial art was Kung Fu, but in the broadcast they mentioned that Jason trained with the Gracies in Jiu-Jitsu prior to this event.
Yeah.
But yeah, his background was Kung Fu, you're correct.
The 5 animal styles. Or something.
5 animal Kung Fu.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I'm sure it works sometimes. Not here, though.
Didn't work here.
Did not work at all. Got his arm caught. Really brutal armbar that Hoist held onto for a couple seconds after the dude tapped. I think he was fine, though. I don't know if his arm... The broadcast said his arm was broken, but it didn't look like it was broken to me. Hoist wound up going belly down on the armbar. And what that means, of course, is that your stomach is on the floor and you have the arm underneath you and you get maximum torque while you're cranking on it. Because he got the armbar from a standing position. So once he manipulated Jason and had the armbar belly down, he really cranked on that shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he kind of fell on top of the arm, is what you were going to say, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how he generated all that.
Because at one point, Gracie was just hanging from his arm.
Yeah, when he was trying to straighten the arm out.
It was pretty brutal.
Yeah, the broadcast, like I said, mentioned that he broke his arm, and I was very concerned that he'd broken his arm. But he shook hands with him afterward and everything, and I'm pretty sure he was fine. And Hoist continued his journey of just destroying everybody.
Yeah.
And it wasn't close. The next fight was Patrick Smith versus Johnny Rhodes. And the broadcast made a point of mentioning that Johnny Rhodes, to this point, had a total of 15 minutes of octagon time to this point, as compared to Patrick Smith's minute and a half. So Patrick, a little fresher coming into this fight.
It was pretty much just a boxing match with some cautious kicks.
Yeah, there was some leg kicks thrown in there, but nothing really developed.
Eventually, Pat Smith got onto Rhodes and got him in a
guillotine.
Standing guillotine.
You got him in a standing guillotine. And did you notice Johnny Rhodes actually tapped with his foot?
I didn't notice.
You didn't see that? Yeah, if you watch it back, because he's trying to fight the choke at the same time as he's tapping. He's fighting the choke with his hands, but with his foot, he's just stomping the ground trying to get Big John to call the fight. It was pretty quick.
Was it?
It was 1 minute and 7 seconds.
Oh.
Yeah, so that was our first semifinal matchup. This card, like we've said it several times, flew by. It was very refreshing. The next matchup was Hoist Gracie versus Remco Pardo. So Remco, much larger than Hoist.
Yeah.
Up to this point, Hoist was actually the larger man in his first 2 fights. He was bigger than Minoku Ichihara, and he was bigger than Jason Deluca.
Mm-hmm.
But now, I believe, if I remember correctly, Remco Pardo was 6'4", 240.
Yes.
And Hoist was 6'1",
175.
something like that, 160, 170, in that range. Not a huge dude. But even with that, Hoist was able to kind of just climb on Remco's back and drag him to the ground.
And at this point, Remco, he had said in his first interview after the fight that he didn't expect to win anything.
Yeah, after sending Orlando Wet to Jupiter, he's like, I didn't even know I could do that. I was surprised.
Mm-hmm.
So he literally said, I didn't expect to win, which I find shocking. If you heard a fighter say that today, you would have we'd had a couple questions to ask about why they were there.
Yeah. Also, going back for just a second, Johnny Rhodes and Pat Smith, after the fight with Pat Smith's interview, this is kind of just the production value again.
Oh, yeah.
The guy interviewing him wouldn't give him the mic nearly as often as he should have.
He kept asking, like, half questions and then letting him start to answer and then would pull the microphone away and did not let him complete a thought. It was very frustrating. You could clearly tell the guy didn't have any, like, formal interview experience. It was really frustrating.
Also, the cameraman managed to capture just about every light shining into the camera as he could.
It was a little much to look at.
Yeah.
Yeah. The production value improved from UFC 1, still needing improvement.
Yes.
It gets like a C-.
Yep.
It barely passes, and in some states fails. So going back to Hoist Gracie versus Remco Pardo, the way the fight eventually ended after a minute and a half was Hoist put Remco in a lapel choke where he grabbed his gi and used it to actually choke him out. Another choke Hoist held on to for a while after the tap. But not dangerous. You're not going to hurt anybody from holding onto a choke too long. They're just going to maybe make them black out a little bit, but they're fine. So in our main event, the main event of UFC 2 No Way Out, we had Hoist Gracie versus Patrick Smith. I think the one word I would use to describe this main event, anticlimactic.
Yeah.
A little bit.
It went pretty quick. All of these are going quick.
All of these fights, again, once we exited the opening round, which was not televised except for Hoist Gracie's fight, none of these fights lasted longer than 3 minutes and 7 seconds. And outside of that, none of these fights lasted over 2 minutes. There was only one fight that broke 3 minutes.
Yep.
Outside of the opening round.
They started off with Gracie actually keeping a distance from Pat Smith, I think because he didn't want to get hit with a punch.
Well, yeah, he knew to do what he wanted to do. He was going to have to manage the distance and then close the distance. Patrick Smith's no slouch. I mean, he made it to this point for a reason. He's very good.
Yeah.
But once Hoist was able to close the distance and get on top of him and get into full mount, it was basically over. I mean, the way the fight ended was a little strange. Hoist had him in full mount, threw some punches, not excellent punches, but Pat didn't know how to get out of there. So he actually wound up tapping to punches.
Yep.
Which you don't see a lot anymore. It happens. You see submissions to strikes every now and then, but it's way less common, and not like that usually.
A thing I noticed was Pat Smith pinned down and getting punched in the face, and he only had one hand free, and he was tapping with it, but then Gracie kept punching him in the face, so he used that face to guard his own. He used his hand to guard his face. Gracie kept punching him until Pat Smith's team threw the towel at Gracie's face.
Yeah, this time instead of throwing the towel vaguely in the octagon near the fighters, his corner launched the towel at Gracie's head. It was kind of funny.
Yep.
But also appropriate, because I don't think things, it was a little bit of a weird end of the fight, but I really don't think things would have improved from Patrick Smith from there. If anything, he was basically just about to get caught in an armbar or a choke or something.
Yep.
It was a bad position all around. Something to mention, the prize pool actually increased from
20%.
By 20%. This time it was $60K. How much was the prize pool for UFC 1?
$50,000.
Okay. So yeah, a little bit of a bump there. They presented Hoist with his comically large check at the end of the night, much like they did on the first night.
Yep.
And Hoist ended the night by basically calling out Planet Earth, like he's Goku, asking who the tough guys are out there to come and fight him.
Yep.
So it's kind of like a cliffhanger for UFC 3, The American Dream, which is just a great name for a card. Not silly at all.
Yeah.
Closing thoughts on UFC 2. Oh my goodness, something we should have mentioned a while ago, and if you're watching these and then listening to these podcasts like we intend, you probably picked up on by now, but there have been no weight classes this entire time. The concept of a weight class did not exist in mixed martial arts yet. Both UFC 1 and UFC 2, and I'm pretty sure UFC 3 as well, are all no weight class competitions. Eventually, we will see the UFC develop weight classes, but not yet.
Not
That's
yet.
for sure. Right now we got Remco's 260 pounds taking on 240 pounds rather taking on Hoist Gracie's 160.
I mean, we did have a sumo wrestler in our first fight.
This is true. This is true. Any closing thoughts about UFC 2?
Well, we're gonna see Gracie again. I haven't seen the poster for 4, so I don't know if he'll win his third. I don't know if he'll win.
Don't look at the card, but the poster for UFC 3 is Ken Shamrock and Hoist Gracie. So until then, thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you back here for UFC 3.